So, let me start this off by saying I'm bipolar. Because of this, I suffer from auditory and visual hallucinations. My visual hallucinations are usually just shadowy figures or seeing things out of the corner of my eye. I know what I experience are hallucinations and nothing supernatural. With that in mind, what I experienced was not a hallucination and was also witnessed by my husband. We have since dubbed the situation the Mannequin Man. It was August or September. We decided to go out and eat on campus. We took a scenic route because of the leaves turning and because we had nothing to do and nowhere to be. As we were nearing the food building, I noticed a bald man wearing a dark red long-sleeve shirt near the parking garage area. At the time, I didn't have an updated prescription for my astigmatism and bad eyesight, so I was wearing my 5-year-old glasses. I felt there was something wrong with him, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It gave me really bad uncanny valley vibes, which is something I have never felt. None of the uncanny valley images ever scare me, but this man did. He noticed me staring and gave a small wave. I awkwardly waved back, and as we passed by him, I realized what was off about him. He had no eyes. It wasn't like empty eye sockets or lost in a freak accident type of way. It was completely smooth skin. There were no scar marks or anything that indicated a surgery had taken place, just smooth skin. The rest of him looked normal. He had a nose, a mouth, ears, just no eyes. Looking back, his face reminds me of a mannequin. He watched me walk past him, so I tore my stare away. He obviously had to have eyes. He waved and his head followed when I walked by. I leaned to my husband and said something along the lines of, maybe they should test me for schizophrenia. I just hallucinated that guy not having any eyes. My husband laughed with me and we joked about it before I dropped it and tried to shake it off. We took about an hour to eat and we decided to take the same way back. I agreed to it because there was no way the man was still there. Much to my dismay, however, he was. I immediately noticed him due to his red shirt against the dark parking garage. I nudged my husband and asked him to look at the guy's face for me because I was still seeing the eyeless hallucination. The man waved at my husband and his head was turned towards us. My husband grabbed my arm tight enough to leave a dark bruise that stayed for a month. I looked up at my husband to tell him he was hurting me, and then I saw the look on his face. I have never seen my husband that terrified, and I never want to again. He pulled my arm, and we would have ran away, but I have complex regional pain syndrome in my feet, basically chronic nerve pain, and I can't run or jump without seriously injuring myself or causing extreme pain. We got back to the dorm, and I asked my husband if he saw what I had seen. He nodded and apologized for bruising me. I know my husband is telling the truth because he has never hurt me. He doesn't feed into my hallucinations, and he has never been scared like that. The only reason why I'm submitting this story is because I saw him again yesterday. On my way to work. I work at a bread bakery and work 14-hour night shifts. I'm about 10 miles away from anybody else. He was on the highway, about 2 miles from the bakery. He was in the same shirt with the same eyeless face. The entire shift was terrifying. I don't know what to do. I don't know what this thing is or what it wants. I'm submitting this story to hopefully find answers as to what this thing could be or to see if anyone else has had a similar story. You can believe this story or not. I don't care. I just hope nobody else has to deal with this thing. Now, I'm sure many of you were fairly skeptical at the beginning of this one, like I was, due to this person's history with hallucinations, but that ended up only kind of adding to the terror of this one because the narrator could literally not even trust their own senses, which apparently turned out to be right. We lived on the corner lot on my block. Because of that, we had a bigger front lawn that my siblings used to leave their bikes out on all the time. My mom used to get pissed because my brother went through bikes left and right. She would always threaten us, saying that if we didn't put our bikes away, they would rust or get stolen, and she wouldn't replace them. One day, I got home from a friend's right before it started to rain, making it a point to put my bike in the garage ASAP. About 20 minutes later, my mom busts into my room screaming at me about my bike being out in the rain. At this point, I figured maybe my brother had taken my bike out and didn't put it back. He did this from time to time. I went outside and found my bike laying in our front lawn right next to the sidewalk. I walked my bike back up to the garage, pissed that my brother both took my bike without asking and got me in trouble for it. But when I opened the garage, my bike was already inside, right where I had put it earlier. I stood there, utterly confused, with literally the same exact bike in my hands. Same brand, same color, Purple Titan Wildcat mountain bike with handbrakes. Same everything. It even looked used like my bike. To this day, I still have no idea where that bike came from. No one ever came to claim it or say it was missing. My siblings also, to this day, still claim to not be responsible for bringing it home. The bike is actually still hanging in my parents' garage, right next to my actual bike. Has anyone else ever had an item duplicate itself? My husband and I worked together at the time this happened. Drove to and from work together daily. Note that we had one pet, a cat named Sammy. No one else lived with us, and we owned our home, so no landlords coming in while we were out or anything like that. So one day we come home from work, and there is, on the floor, in the middle of the kitchen, an egg. One single egg, no cracks, in perfect condition. The weird part? We had no eggs. None in the fridge. Didn't eat them often, so we had those frozen egg whites that come in a cardboard carton. We scratched our heads about that, threw the egg away, and that was that. Until the next day. We came home, and another egg. Again, right in the middle of the kitchen floor. Now we're getting freaked out. Once was weird enough, but twice? We considered cracking this one open, but decided against that and threw it out. It never happened again. To this day, many years later, we mention the time Sammy laid eggs in the kitchen, but have yet to come up with any sort of plausible explanation for it. Just bizarre. Neighbor's daughter is 4, has an invisible friend. Parents are told it's normal and to play along. Little girl sometimes brings her mom her friend's scarf to wash with the white laundry. Her hands are empty, but she's holding up the pretend scarf. My mom plays along. Happens every other month for a few months. The girl can be found in her room talking to her friend. She calls him Charlie. Then, the mom's father dies. They have tons of family and friends in town. Decide to have a reception at their house. The mom goes into the attic to get all the old pictures of her dad, sets them up all around the house. During the party, the little girl comes out of her room. As she's walking past a table, she stops and says, "Mommy, why do you have a picture of Charlie?" Her mom says, "Those aren't pictures of Charlie, that's my dad." The little girl says, "No, that's Charlie," pointing to one specific photo at the back of the table. Her mom picks up the picture and looks at the back. It's not her father, it's her grandfather. His middle name is Charles, and it's one of those pictures where he's standing on the ladder of his fighter plane, wearing a white scarf. Her mom swears the box was buried in the attic, undisturbed, and that the little girl was never up there alone. There's no way she could have seen that picture. So I've always been into supernatural and horror stuff. I've always found it interesting, but wasn't really a true believer until 3 years ago. When I graduated high school, my mom took me on a vacation to stay in a bunch of different haunted hotels in my state. We went to a few and didn't have any serious experiences until we went to the one that was the farthest away. We checked in, and I had complained of a really gnarly stomachache that had kicked in almost the second that we walked through the front doors. I told her about it only because I was worried I wouldn't get to go on the little ghost hunt that the hotel staff led, but she gave me some Pepto and we moved on. Anyway, all the guests met in the main sitting room of the hotel. It was one of those bed and breakfast places run out of a ridiculously old Victorian home with the old-timey furniture and setup. Eventually, the tour started. They had those EMF things and the ghost boxes where they could talk through the radio static. I figured a lot of it was kinda bull, but I also fed into it. My stomachache had been getting progressively worse this whole time. After the first couple of rooms, we got to a room where the tour guide said that people who visited had a tendency to connect with loved ones who had passed. We went into the room, and my stomach was absolutely killing me. They had the room situated with church pews to sit in, and I was super uncomfortable, but sat down anyway. She turned on the one ghost box that didn't have the radio static. That was supposed to connect their voices through. I kind of thought this one was the most bullshit of them all, until it said my name. Then the same machine said the name of my best friend who had died in the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. The guide asked if any of us knew someone by that name. I said yes, and she asked me to ask a question that only he would know the answer to. I asked what instrument he wanted to play in band, and the machine immediately responded and said, trombone. After that, I could barely speak. I was a mess, crying and staring at the guide. The machine said, I miss you, and my friend's name. The guide shut off the machine and led me out of the room, had the whole group take a short tour break, and sat down with me in the center room. She comforted me, and I felt so embarrassed for breaking down, but after I had that experience, my stomach ache was completely gone. I felt fine. I felt comforted and safe. I think that moment forever changed my thoughts and feelings about the world, but it brought me peace in a weird way. Now, one possible logical explanation I can think of for this one is that maybe the hotel kind of does like a little bit of background research on the people who come to stay in the hopes that like when they go into that room, they can sort of feed some oddly specific information through that ghost box or whatever and kind of make them believe that it was their actual loved one. And while that idea on its own isn't too absurd, that would literally mean that they're like exploiting these people's passing for a couple extra spook points or whatever. So for that reason, I doubt that that's what actually happened, though it's possible. But if it wasn't a part of the act, then why was such specific information coming through the machine? I've been trying to wrap my head around this for a few days, and I just want to get it off my chest. I'm 22 years old, and I've had this blanket a family member made for me before I was born. I've kept it this entire time, and I still sleep with it every night. It's maybe 2 or 3 feet long, and one side is pink with small birds on it, and the other side is a soft, fuzzy material. A few days ago, when I came home from class, I didn't see my blanket. I asked my roommates about it, and they had no clue what I was talking about. They knew I had a blanket when I was a kid, but they'd never seen it before, only in pictures. I thought they were lying to me and accidentally stained it or something. I leave it out in the living room sometimes when I have coffee in the morning. I told them it was okay and to let me see it, but they were genuinely confused. I called my mom later that night after searching everywhere for it to complain about my roommates hiding things. And this is the part that confuses me the most. My mom told me that we put it away when I left for my freshman year of college. She sent me photos of the exact blanket I had. It's been 4 years since freshman year. I had my blanket the day before, and it just disappeared and was suddenly at my mother's house hours away. I've been thinking about this for days now. I'm 39 years old. I started caring for my mother and a disabled family who were neighbors of mine when I was 14. It's the most rewarding job, but also stressful and sometimes downright depressing. This incident happened in 2019. I was working in a care home for elderly and disabled people and found a close bond with a guy who I'll call Brian. He was in his 80s, had cerebral palsy and dementia. I felt a bond with him as my partner also has cerebral palsy, and I could relate closely to the struggles that Brian had gone through in his life. He was also a cat lover, and we would share stories of our pets while I assisted him with his care routine. One day, I had second shift, which ran from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock. When my colleagues and I were about to start our shift, the manager of the care home told us that Brian had been taken to the hospital at lunchtime as he was feeling unwell and had been less responsive than usual. I was sad, but thought he'd be back that evening and that I could joke with him about making us all worry about him. Sadly, the manager came at around 6 and told us that Brian had passed away an hour or so before. I was devastated. I allowed myself to cry for 5 minutes and then had to pull out my stiff British upper lip and just carry on my shift. Due to personal life issues, I didn't work there for a couple of months, but when I returned, I decided to start working third shift. I'm a night owl and struggle with insomnia, so 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. shifts suited me well. When I did return, a lady who I'll call Brenda was now in Brian's room. The very first night, I have my beeper go off. There's buttons and cords in residents' rooms that they can use that alert us if they need assistance. And it's Brenda in what used to be Brian's room. I make my way to the relevant floor, and I can hear Brenda shouting at someone to go away, so I rush into her room thinking that maybe a resident with dementia had gotten lost and went into the wrong room, but when I open the door, there's just Brenda in bed, lights out, telling me to, quote, get rid of him. I turn the lights on and look around. Still no one. I asked Brenda what had happened, and she told me, the man with the cats is under the bed telling me to get out of his room. My blood ran cold. Brenda hadn't even met Brian. She became a resident after he had passed away. Sure, some carers may have mentioned his name, but she was so specific when I asked her to describe him. Long nose, blue eyes, white hair, and big bushy mustache. Brian to a T. We didn't have any pictures of him, so I have no explanation of how she knew what he looked like. I called a colleague to help me calm Brenda and get her back to sleep, and when we leave, they tell me that Brenda does that at least once a week. Brian was sometimes quite grumpy when people who he didn't know were in his room. These events with Brenda got less frequent over the next few months and then stopped. I hope that means that Brian and his cats got bored and moved on. In college, I was at a friend's dorm room late at night on the weekend. We were drinking a bit. I told them I had to use the bathroom that was up the hall. When I opened the restroom door, I saw that one of the sinks in the room was completely torn off the wall, and one of the connected pipes was broken and shooting a large quantity of water onto the floor. This would definitely be problematic in a multi-storied structure. I went back to the friend's room and told him to contact the RA or the front desk to have them send someone to fix it ASAP. Instead, he went to check it out himself and was gone a couple minutes. He came back and I asked him if he found the RA or made the call because there was a lot of water involved. He just gave me a weird look and sat down. A minute later, he said that there was nothing wrong, which was impossible, so I go to check it out myself. I went back and was puzzled when I saw that the room was completely perfect. No broken sink or pipe, and not a drop of water on the floor. I then made a round to see if somehow I had gone into a different restroom on the floor, but all were normal. Only a few minutes had passed between when I saw the damage and when I returned to check it out. Certainly not enough time to make a complete repair and dry the room out. Now for this one, at first glance, it definitely seems like this person just wandered into a different bathroom, but they specifically state that they went to every other bathroom on that floor and they were all perfectly fine. This also all occurred within minutes, so it's not like they could have just fixed it all up super fast. So what happened here? This is a story from my mom. She used to work in a nursing home during the night. There was an old woman on one floor who always had a baby doll from a granddaughter or someone that lived in her family. She was never without it. My mom said that she had to move this woman from one floor to another, and in the moving process, she lost the doll she always had. She was pretty distraught about it, but there wasn't anything they could do. A few weeks later, my mom and another nurse aide go into the woman's room, and she's holding a baby doll, a different one from the one before. My mom strikes up conversation and asks the lady where she got the doll from, if it was from a family member, etc. Well, the old lady points a finger at the corner of the room at a rocking chair and says, "The nice little girl gave it to me." Well, there was no girl in the room or anywhere in the building, as it was after midnight. My mom doesn't believe in ghosts or paranormal stuff, but she says that this is one thing she can't ever explain. It still freaks me out whenever I think about it. This one time when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I had a dream that this lady had fallen out of the back of a pickup truck on the highway and was ran over. I remember distinctively in my dream that she was under a tarp and all you could see was bloody white socks sticking out from underneath it. I woke up and later that day, about 45 minutes from where I lived at the time, a lady had fallen out of the back of a pickup truck and had been ran over, just like in my dream. When they showed the scene on the news, you could see white socks sticking out from underneath the tarp. I had no idea who this lady was and had no connection to her. I never got her name or anything, but it has always creeped me out. When I was about 11 at summer camp, we went on an overnight camping trip in the woods. In the middle of the night, nature called and I went outside. There, I saw an older teen in a varsity jacket standing outside taking a smoke. I asked him if he knew a good place to go, and he smiled at me. I turned away for a second, and when I looked back, he was gone. The next morning, I asked my counselor who the guy was, and when I described him, flat top with a varsity jacket, he turned white. He said that in the 50s, a bunch of local kids had gone into the woods and were murdered. I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to scare me. Several years later, when the internet was a thing, I ended up remembering the incident one day and searched it out. It turns out my counselor was 100% correct. I've always been a short dude, and I was especially small as a kid. My mom had a high shelf in the hallway with some glass knickknacks on it. One time, while walking down the hall, my head hit the edge of it hard enough to send the glass knickknacks falling to the ground and shattering. I felt absolutely awful about this, but my mom was mostly confused as to how in the world I managed to do it, asking if I jumped or something. I hadn't. Later on, out of curiosity, I tried to touch it again with my head. Even on my tiptoes, stretching up as far as I couldn't even touch it. I still have no clue what happened. We've discussed this experience several times now on the channel, where people seem to have these strange memories of floating as children, or they even sort of remember, like in this case, where they were just somehow higher than they could have possibly been. I think last time we talked about this, we deduced that these may be memories of children who were just being carried by their parents. The only problem with that theory in this story is that the mother has no idea how they got up there, so somehow they managed to get up that high all on their own. I was on vacation with my parents and younger brother on what looked like a farm. This was in Algarve, Portugal. I remember there were 3 yellow houses and we were staying in the one on the left. After we were there for about 2 days, I remember a family of 4 also coming to stay. I believe they were French. The father was tall, athletic, and bald. The mother was also tall and had dark, short hair. The older daughter was about 10 years old and had a pink t-shirt with a bright heart on it. The younger daughter was about my age. I vividly remember playing with them and feeding the local spiders with ants because I've always loved spiders. I was showing them to the smaller girl and the other one stood at a distance. I also remember we also played at sunset, and I have this distinct memory of seeing the girls outlined by the setting sun with their parents nearby. I don't remember my parents interacting with their parents, but again, there was a language barrier, and I was young. On the last day, I remember we left early, and I was sad I didn't say goodbye to the girls, but I believe I kept this to myself. Fast forward to 2015, I was talking to my mother about vacations we had, and I mentioned that one in particular. I mentioned the family. My mother says, "What family?" Turns out we were alone in there because the farm wasn't even open to the public yet. We were testing the place because my parents were friends with the owner, so it was absolutely impossible for someone else to be staying there. Even so, my mother asked my father about it, and he says with absolute certainty that we were the only ones there. Even my brother remembers the girls and the family perfectly. We say the same exact descriptions. My parents were kind of baffled at this. So was I. I still have no explanation for this, as I always remembered that family vividly, as does my brother. So my grandparents live in the middle of nowhere in northern Arkansas. It's a tiny town, I'm talking like 500 people live there, situated cozy in the Ozarks. It's always been eerie out there to me, but I always figured it was because I'm from Little Rock, so I'm used to more of a suburban, small city life. My grandfather is an old indigenous man, and he's always been a little eccentric. He had stories of creatures out in the woods, and even some stories he refused to tell because he was just so afraid of them. I've always been scared of the property. It's in the middle of nowhere with nothing but forest surrounding it. My cousin and I slept in the attic whenever we would come over. I'll call my cousin Brayla and her older sister Dakota. She was the one tucking us into bed for the night. Dakota told us good night and closed the door behind her. It was dark in there, pitch darkness. I couldn't see a damn thing. Eventually, I hear the shuttering of the door from the crawl space, and something jumps on the bed on top of us, growling and clawing. It almost felt like a big dog. Naturally, Brayla and I scream bloody murder. We're kicking and flailing around like crazy, trying to get whatever this thing was off of us. Almost immediately, the door flies open and the light clicks on with Dakota rushing in, asking us what happened. Brayla and I are crying, but this thing was nowhere. It's like it just disappeared out of thin air as soon as the light got turned on. We had trouble sleeping there again. When I was about 16, my mother and stepdad decided to introduce a new dog to the household. Her name was Bella, and despite their intention being to make her a family pet, I quickly and unintentionally sort of adopted her as my own. We were practically inseparable, and she became my best friend. She would be for about 3 years before I got a frantic video call from my mother while over at my girlfriend's house. Bella had apparently gotten sick and was now slowly passing away under my bed. One of Bella's favorite places to hide when she became stressed or overwhelmed was under my bed, presumably because I was usually laying right above her, and there she lay now. Thanking the stars that I had made it home in time, I talked to her warmly but choked up with tears as I began to pet her. In her final moments on Earth, she noticed me there next to her. It was almost like she was waiting for me to show up before finally letting go. Weeks pass and everyone in the house is trying their best to cope. We had our Bella cremated and her ashes sat in a wooden box in the downstairs china cabinet. This china cabinet was directly in front of the staircase to the second floor of the house. One night when my girlfriend was over, we were getting ready for bed in the living room as I hadn't amassed the courage to re-enter my room and scrub the floor. As we were talking, in the middle of my sentence, my gaze affixed to the threshold between the staircase and the china cabinet directly above my girlfriend's shoulder. I was frozen with dread. It's a feeling I can't do justice when recounting it here. I saw Bella, but not only did I see her, I saw her leaving the dining room and walking up the stairs on her hind legs. I don't know if you've seen that infamous YouTube video, Obey the Walrus, but the way Bella was walking, I can only compare to the choppy, sped up, almost stop-motion-like way the creepy lady in that video walked. It was as if she was waddling from side to side, or shuffling, as opposed to just walking. Bella went all the way up the stairs, out of my field of vision, and I screamed. I have never been that petrified before in my life. It didn't make any sense. I woke up my mom, panicked and confused, and told her I had just watched Bella walk up the stairs on her hind legs. If it really was just the apparent spirit of our sweet Bella wanting to go lay under my bed one last time, why the f*** would she choose to appear as something waddling on its hind legs? My girlfriend and I didn't even want to stay in the house after that happened.